Hello. Today I'm going to share my process of acrylic abstract mixed media and how I'm using them for backgrounds for my spirit animal painting series. So I'm going to just do a little bit of a tutorial on how I create these backgrounds. So welcome, and I hope you enjoy. As you can see, I've started out with pre-painted panels, and what I did with these, I actually used acrylic inks um, just to kind of create some color and design and texture to get rid of the white canvas underneath. These are 8 by 10 canvas panels. So I used acrylic inks and water and just kind of created some color underneath. And now I'm putting in sort of mm, a thin wash, not real watery, but a thin wash of color over the inked canvas. And I wanted it somewhat watery so that a little bit of that inked color would shine through. For the most part, I chose very earthy colors because these being animal spirit paintings, I wanted to make sure that it had sort of a natural feel. So I didn't want to use a bunch of bright colors, and I tried to keep a fairly limited palette. I think the only color outside of a typical primary color palette was I used a light magenta at some point in there, and I'll show you where that is. Other than that, pretty standard colors, and that just helped me keep the palette somewhat limited. I think, I used phthalo blue, maybe some phthalo green somewhere, but for the most part, it was all pretty standard colors. So here I'm just trying to get a thin, transparent wash to allow those other colors to show through. So once all those dried, my next step was to put another thin wash of color on, and I try to use complementary colors, each layer, a dark and a light, and go back and forth with them. So each layer I'm trying to play with the layer that's underneath to make sure that it's so that it's compatible, or so that the colors are fit well together. And then I put the alcohol in, and you can see the nice cells that it makes. It makes nice patterns, and at this point, I'm just playing. I'm just letting the painting do what it wants. That's the part of the abstraction that's fun, is just allowing the painting to do itself. The thin wash works really well to add in the alcohol to create the cells. And I try to use the same color on a couple of them where I want to, um, create a complementary layer of color. So I'll choose which painting I'm doing or which canvas I'm doing based on which color I'm using. And so that way I can use up all the paint that I have. It's just a quicker process. And since I'm doing a series, I want them to be pretty much in the same palette, so same basic colors. And, I want to try to do them as quick as possible. I do have a show in July that I'm going to be doing selling some prints of this series. So I need to get them finished so that I have time to get the prints done and kind of, get myself set up. So I'm just doing them kind of as a huge project, working on several at a time. And here, after that first layer dried, now I'm going to just try some more techniques to create other textures and another layer. So I'm spraying alcohol, and then you see I'll use a foam roller, which is that one is a foam roller, and that's just to remove some paint and create a little bit of texture. So I'm pushing paint around with that foam roller, and then I'll also be using. You'll see me use a textured brayer later, and that one just helps to kind of add some highs and lows. Takes paint out and puts paint on, and there's, I'm using a wedge there just to give it some interest in design and texture. Again, spraying with alcohol. And then there's the sponge roller, just pushing it around and removing some. And some of the techniques didn't work well. So like here, I didn't like all that red paint, so I'm removing a lot of it. And I think that was crimson red, I want to say. So I'm removing a lot of it, and then I ended up, because there was alcohol under there, it rubbed it down to the canvas. So then I have to go back in with paint and try and fix it. But again, it's not a big deal. I've gotten to where I don't worry about such things because I know, especially since this is a background, there's no mistake. And even if you absolutely hate it, you can cover it up with a layer of paint and start again on it. So it's not a big deal. As long as you're drawing the layers underneath, you can keep adding layers. So this is not a point at which I need to be really worried about what happens. I just move along until I feel like it's got a look to it that I like. So there's the sponge roller again, and what I've done is where I've used the blue paint on one painting to remove paint, I'm putting it on another canvas. So the sponge roller comes in handy, and then I just clean it in between colors or switch to a different roller, and that way, I'm not getting muddy colors. So, and it is sloppy. You see me wiping color off of the next door neighbor there because I wasn't being very careful. That's the only thing about doing these all together, is that sometimes you will get splatter from one onto another, and if it's not a color you want on there, you gotta just wipe it off. So that is phthalo blue, and then here is the textured brayer. It's got kind of I want to say like a leopard print texture to it. So, it's not, you're not going to necessarily see a leopard print texture, but it gives, although now that I'm putting it on this piece, you can see where the blue was picked up in little dots, and it does apply some of that texture on there. And I just feel like it gives an interesting, an interesting look to it. I'm going for depth, but for nothing necessarily obvious. And we still needed some contrast, so I'm adding in a mixture of cadmium yellow and white and spraying it with water, and then creating drips so that I can, again, create sort of a subtle texture, and then reducing the hard edges so that it has more of a softer, dreamy effect in the back. Yeah. And I'll use this same color on a couple different panels. Again, just trying to be efficient so I can get these done quickly and not waste a bunch of paint. But this is really a fun process, actually. Now, if I were to do an actual abstract painting without putting a subject on the top, I would be doing this slightly differently. And I'm not an abstract artist. I'm learning how to do abstract work, but but it's not easy. It's not easy to create an abstract that is interesting and that attracts people's eye. That's tricky. Most people think, oh, abstract, that looks like it would be easy to do. It's easy to follow all the rules, For example, having a focal point and using the rule of thirds so that your focal point is in one of the corners in the rule of thirds, or um, making sure that you have resting space, that you have at least, 5 layers, and that it's obvious in the depth that you have those layers. So, there are rules to this, complementary colors or triad colors, or there's a lot of different quote rules that you follow when you do abstract work. And of course, there's many different styles. There's geometric. There's gosh, I can't even think of them all. So you can do abstract by just following the rules. Is it easy? I think it takes a while to really create something that looks interesting and inviting to a person, to make them want to buy it, or to make them want to own it, have it up in their house somewhere, or whatever. It's there is a skill to it. Yeah, at some point I do want to try my hand at some actual abstracts. I do them with my sigil paintings each month, but they're not, those aren't necessarily pieces that I'm ever going to make available for anyone, because first of all, I don't, they're not good. But they're just about expressing my emotion and my inner self in an affirmation. But what those are doing is helping me develop different techniques that eventually I may be able to use in some abstract work. Um, my struggle is that I enjoy representational art. I love telling stories. And so creating pieces that combine abstract and realism seem to be the thing that I gravitate toward. And they really bring me a lot of joy to create. And I have, I play around with this program called Mandelbulb. And it's such an inspiring thing to do, because it makes me think of different kinds of designs that I want to try when I do abstract. I know most people think of abstract as strictly intuitive, and it can be, and most of mine is, especially with the alcohol cell and drips. But I'm kind of a planner, to be honest. So for me, uh, if I have an idea in mind when I start my abstract, then I can Um, I can be more controlled in following rules and making sure things are put in places that I like. Um, so what I do is I go to this Mandelball program, and you'd have to use it to understand what I'm saying, but it's something that you can create these really interesting shapes and landscapes, geometrical landscapes, and it's based on a mathematical infinite fractal program. So there's a lot of very cool patterns, and I'm going to use some of those images that I created digitally as as sources for some abstract work. They'll be and these will be very geometrical for the most part. Um, so that's a whole new deal. That's going to be down the road. Right now, I'm just focused on playing and coming up with the different techniques and styles that I like. So this piece on the upper right that I'm working on with the sponge roller, I put that big splotch of white in there. I think it ends up changing just a little bit later. But I just felt like it needed something, some kind of contrast, because it was just too red and green. So it does change a little later. And here I'm just, throwing in shapes and trying to create another layer, some more texture. I'm not consciously thinking of flora, fauna, whatever. I'm not consciously thinking of plants, but I am thinking of shapes and patterns that would give a hint of a plant, because it's the background for animals. So I wanted it to have sort of a mysterious but natural look to it in the background. I love putting splatters on them. You could tell that, huh? All right, so I'm going to start showing you how I now add the digital, or the image. And I take my iPad and I use a program called Procreate, and I'm going to show you exactly how I set this up. So I take a picture of the background, and then I put it in my Procreate, and then I go in and I put the image onto the background that I just printed, or that I just photographed. So this shows you, okay, there's the background image, and then I go ahead and I take the image source that I'm going to use. And by the way, my image sources are from, they're not off of Google Images or any of that. I get these fair and square. Let's just put it that way. So I take the image and I embed it into the photograph, so that now this becomes my source. The cool thing about this is I can lower the opacity in the program, so that then I can go in and I can look and see, okay, where should the eye be? So for example, there's a green dot in the background, and you see how I can easily tell, okay, well, that's the area of the eye. Here's a green dot where the nose is. And so I'm able to use the spots in the background to determine where I'm going to draw the figure. So this is sort of like using a grid system. But instead of a grid, I've got a very busy background that I can then use to determine where things should go. So now I take my white charcoal pencil and I start sketching out, paying attention to where all those little markings are. It's kind of like a little map. And you can use it to put in all the shapes of your image. And this way you don't have to draw a grid. You're just following all the little signposts in the background. It makes it very quick and enjoyable. It's like dot to dot almost, or You're not having to measure anything. You're just eyeballing where it goes. And the charcoal is easy because if you don't like where you put something, you just wipe off the charcoal, and then paint will pretty much dissolve the charcoal. So this was the next one, and this is the bison. So I started with the bear, then I'm sketching out the bison, and you can see that I'm figuring out where all the parts go, and um, same process that I did with the bear, drawing it out and making sure I've got the proportions correct. It's just so much easier to do it this way now. I know a lot of people use projection. They have a projector. I have a projector, but I haven't used it for this yet. I haven't had the need to do that. If I'm doing a huge painting, then I could see the use of projection. But for the smaller size paintings, I feel like that's more work than this, than just doing it this method. So I don't use my projector yet. We'll see down the road if I do something big enough that I need one, I suppose. Yeah, so you just see me continue with sketching this bison out, and then eventually we get to the painting stage. So here's the third one, and as you can see, I've already drawn this out with the charcoal pencil. So I'm going to start by applying a lighter color first because it needs to stand out from the background. And so I'm just using like a yellow ochre mixed with a little bit of white. I don't need it to be super opaque. I just need it to kind of give me the shapes to follow, but also to brighten it up a little bit so that as I apply color, it's not going to kind of just fade into the background because I want it to stand out. So the bright color, it helps me bring it out from the background. And then as I add other layers, of course, it's going to take on its eventual true look as a representational painting. So this is just like coloring in a coloring book, just getting it all in. I do be careful though when it comes to like the nose and the eyes. I don't necessarily want, in some places, I don't necessarily want the bright color. I might switch to either something a little more on the mid tone, like I'll take like a burnt sienna and sometimes mix it with a little bit of yellow ochre, or I'll go yellow ochre and white, yellow ochre, burnt sienna, and then raw umber or something. And that way I do have different values, different tones that help guide me so that when I start putting in the details, I can tell what needs to be shadow, what needs to be light, or what's darker for what's lighter. So this kind of starts that process for me. And this elk was a challenge because my source, he was facing into the light, so there were areas that were not quite in shadow, but they weren't facing the light. And it appears that it would be like an evening sun. So there were places where I was like, okay, should this be like a reddish color? So I had to play with the image a little bit in my tablet to change the lighting so that I could tell what is the real actual underlying color. And that's the advantage too of using digital methods to sort of change the image so that you can see uh, where are the highlights, where are the shadows, what color is actually in there. Because sometimes it just looks black, or it maybe just looks gray, but when you lighten it up, you can see that in that gray, there's actually, say, a little bit of purple or whatever. And that helps because it helps you to add um, a variety of colors to your image so that it's not looking too flat. I'm still learning that, but I mean, I'm still working on how to do that efficiently or in a way that works within the painting. So you can see I'm starting to kind of put in some sort of mid-tones. It's still light because, as I said, I want to make sure that the light colors are, uh, that there's a brightness underneath the colors I'm laying down. And so once I start putting in the dark, then I go back and then I start trying to add in the textures. But in a minute, you'll see me starting with that raw umber, and I will start trying to put in the like the eye, the nose, the dark places on his fur, and there are some parts of the antler where in the image, the source, they look like bright white, but I don't want to use bright white at all anywhere in the painting, really. So I have to be careful not to start off with too bright a color because I want those parts of the antlers to show the lightness that they're supposed to be, but I don't want it to be so overpowering that it looks like white tips that are just stuck on top of the antler. So there's a trick to that, I guess, just learning how to get just the right color to where it looks white, but it's not quite white. I struggled a little bit with that on this painting, but in the end, it's okay. I like how it turned out. So again, burnt sienna, just trying to build up some fur texture. And in areas of the face where there was no texture, I again changed the contrast on my source so that I could see what colors were really under there. And that was really helpful. As far as sources, image sources, I've mentioned before, I do have a brother-in-law, and he's a photographer. He does a lot of nature photographs. I also have a friend who she also does wildlife photography, and I've asked her on occasion if I could use her images, and she's always said yes, of course, anytime. But even when I've been given permission, I try to I use it as a source just for the shape and so on, but I try to make some changes, and even a lot of times I will obviously I'll flip the image, things like that, just so that I feel like I don't want it to look just like their photograph. So even if I've been given permission, I really don't want it to look just like a photograph. The other thing that I've done is any video that someone has allowed me to use, what I do with the video is I freeze frame or I print screen on a part of the video where I like what the animal's position. And once I print screen that, that's the image that I can use as a source. The only trick with that is you're not always going to get a really high definition, good image out of it. So the quality might not be great. So in that case, it's really a matter of you're just using it for the shape of the animal, the proportions, and you're going to need to use several sources to go in and be able to get the right contrast. Do you want the image to be facing the sun? Do you want the sun behind the so those are things that you can decide later, and then you can use a variety of sources to get the look that you want. Or you might want to change the color, so you can pull up another source to kind of look at, okay, what color do I want this to be? So for the most part, I mix and match a lot of images. I mean, you're only seeing the ones that I'm looking at for the shape here, but I used a variety of images to figure out the color, the texture, things like that. So it's perfectly fine to use image sources. I would just say make sure that you have permission, and make sure that that it's not like you're creating an exact copy of that person's photograph. What's the point of that, right? It's really just taking that image and using it as a guide. That's how I do it anyway. That being said, there are paintings that I've done in the past that are pretty much exact copies of the photograph. When I first started trying to paint animals, my brother-in-law allowed me to use his photographs from the beginning, and some of them I did try to do realistic images of his photographs. And the same with pet portraits. Most of them I tried to do just realistic photographic, as real as I could get it anyway. I'm not a very good realist painter. I representational, sure, but when it comes to realism, I struggle. I'm kind of sloppy. So here are the dark places. I've used, some is raw umber mixed with burnt sienna, and then the darker spots is raw umber mixed with phthalo blue, because it gives you, it's not quite a purple, but it gives you dark that almost looks black, or like a really deep brown, without having to use black or brown. So I really like playing with purples and blues and raw umber, or burnt sienna to get the deep colors without having to go to a full black. I think the only color you can't necessarily create very easily is white, but you wouldn't want to anyway, right? So the tips of the antlers that are supposed to be white, and I guess that is where the velvet has been completely rubbed off of them certain times of the year. I think. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know a lot about elk and like red deer. So, but I do know that there are times of the year where they have velvety horns and times that they don't. I know one of, whether it's the deer or the elk, maybe both. But anyway, I've seen elk in real life when I was in Idaho. Oh my gosh, they're so majestic. They're just absolutely gorgeous animals, and they're so big. I just didn't expect them to be so big. I was so blown away by that. But they're majestic for sure. And I just love wildlife. So that's, I think, one of the reasons that I enjoy painting them so much, is just animals fascinate me. So I'm finally going in to get the sun is shining on the back end of him, but it also, these animals do have a lighter back end. Um, they have like almost like a golden peachy, I don't know how to describe it. It was like a golden peachy back end. And then they have like this darker fur on their head and chest. So it was challenging to capture the colors that I needed to capture without it looking um, too flat, you know? So you've got to work with multiple colors and go in back and forth, light to dark, you know, to try and create the texture and the multiple colors that are in there. And then there's also, you know, reflections from the background. You're going to get a little bit of a glow from your background here and there. That's what I love about doing these backgrounds, these abstract backgrounds, the way that I've done them, is that if I leave it thin enough, if I leave the image thin enough in certain spots, it's like the background is reflecting in the image. It just makes it much easier to create that in the painting if you've already got it in the background. You just do a transparent wash and allow some of that background to show through. I don't know if that's a good technique, but right now it works for me. So why not, right? Yeah. So we're just starting to try and put in more lights here. So please, if you haven't already, would you like and subscribe and comment or any of those if you feel like that this has helped you, or if you've just enjoyed it as uh, entertaining. If you are interested in the Spirit Animal series and you'd like a print, these will be up in a month or so. I've got to finish them and then put the prints out. So, you know, check my website. And if you want to join my mailing list, I will be announcing uh, through this channel, but also through my email list, my subscription list from my website. So if you'd like to be part of that and know when I'm releasing things that'll be for sale, then please join and stay up on what my latest thing is. So thank you so much for joining me today. I'm almost done. I don't think that you'll see the complete ending of this, but you will see the finished product. I think my camera cut off as usual. I know that sounds like such an excuse, but it happens all the time. And then it's like I have wet paint and I have so much time, so little time to finish it that I just go ahead and finish it, because to take the time to empty my camera, upload the footage or recharge it or whatever the need is, in that amount of time, then I lose time to finish the painting. So I try really hard to time this out so you can see it from beginning to end. But you'll see most of it, and in a few minutes it'll go straight to the finished product. So you didn't miss much, I promise. Anyway, I really appreciate you all, and I hope you enjoyed this one. A little longer than most, but I hope you enjoyed it. So here's the finished painting. Probably I'll end up doing a little bit of touch up. I always kind of sit with them and I tell you, oh yeah, here's the finished thing. And then later I'm like, I'm going to fix that. So who knows, but and there's the three. So the bear, the bison, and the elk so far. Those are the first three that are finished. And I'm going to start on the next one tomorrow. And then when the whole series is done, I will share that with you. But thanks again for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.